So we're in the Byzantine period, and it occurs to me that I perhaps have not explained to y'all why we call it that. What's the difference between the Roman period and the Byzantine period? The difference is that the Roman Emperor Constantine, he who introduced Christianity to the Roman Empire, or not really introduced, but made it okay, made it official, moved the capital of that empire, moved the capital of the Roman Empire to an old Greek colony that had grown up to be a city on the Bosporus, ways north of Troy, in modern-day northwestern Turkey. And that city was called, in Greek, Byzantine. That was its ancient name from when it was a colony beginning in the 6th century BCE. And when Constantine moves the capital to Byzantium, the political designator by which we understand this period switches from Roman to Byzantine, at least in the area of the East. And over the course of the next many centuries, the history of the Roman/Byzantine world in the East and the West come to diverge. So, but in the area that we are, which is the East, this era is called the Byzantine period. And in this period, despite Constantine having established as an accepted religion Christianity, this was not in any way a threat or some sort of cultural takeover. All religions, including pagan religions, flourished. They all flourished side by side. Temples, Greek and Roman temples stood. People continued to go and worship there. And various other non-pagan religions, what in their early years one might call cults or sects, but what we tend to call religion now, also continued to flourish. And in the area that we're studying, the communities of these various religious groups communicated to themselves and to each other via religious architecture and the decoration inside that architecture. We've been focusing on this to the detriment, really, of all the other sorts of remains that we could be looking at. And you may have noticed that especially in the Byzantine period, we've hardly spoken at all, maybe not really at all, about any other sorts of settlements and any other sorts of archaeological remains. But of course they existed. In fact, the Byzantine period in Palestine is, until modernity, the most populated period. The countryside is dense with villages. There are many, many large cities. In most of the city's churches start to be built. A small community of Jews even moves back to Jerusalem in this era. It is a densely urbanized, highly integrated cultural and economic system. And by integrated economic system, I mean that there are cities, there are towns, there are small settlements, there's rural-urban interaction. There are all the things that we paid some attention to in earlier periods and we have omitted from considering in this period, but they all existed. And the way of life in these places was pretty similar from one place to another. You cannot, on the basis of domestic architecture or public buildings or the name of the city or the languages that are attested there, identify the specific religious orientation of the people. religious practice confined itself to an expression to the individual structures that each community built for itself. And it was via those structures that they spoke to one another. So what you're looking at here on the screen, the contemporary, essentially, octagonal church at Capernaum and synagogue at Capernaum, with, in the case of the synagogue, the depiction of the old-fashioned wheeled ark, the mobile ark, on one of the lintel blocks. And almost within a generation or two of the construction of this synagogue, here is the mosaic pavement from Beit Alpha, a synagogue constructed in a very different manner than this one, in a style that is more evocative of churches that are now being built. Not this octagonal church, which is a special case, but other small basilical churches, small versions on the model of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And in each of these cases, the style of the architecture and the specific sorts of decoration, whether sculpted or mosaic, are used to send a message. So here the message is of singular importance, something extremely special because the style of the building is unique. This is the first octagonal structure of this sort to have been built in Palestine. Here the style is, for its time, old. It deliberately is modeled, the style of the synagogue at Capernaum modeled on the style of the nearby synagogue at Chorazin, for example, which to the people who lived at Capernaum in the later part of the 5th and the early part of the 6th century CE was very old. It was 300 years old. That's older than anything you can see around you here. So just to emphasize the amount of years that had passed. And here, of course, at Beit Alpha, the mosaic pavement, because interior mosaics were the decorative style of choice for churches, and in the ambulatories of the octagonal church here and in the center part of the octagonal church there were beautiful mosaics. And this mosaic, of course, showing the scene from Genesis where Abraham is commanded to sacrifice Isaac, but then the angel of the Lord stops him before he can do that and substitutes a ram in his place. And the central element in this mosaic is this adorable ram balancing on his tail, looking much too big for the supposed thicket in which he's embedded. All right. So one of the main contrasts that we talked about last time, and that was evoked in the kind of architectural and decorative face-off between Capernaum and Beit Alpha, was the face-off between place and history. At Capernaum, the basis for building up in this place was the association of the site with Jesus, and at Beit Alpha, where there was no association of place, the specter of history was raised. The lure of place brought pilgrims in increasing number to this land after the period of Constantine, and the earliest is the Lady Egeria, who we met last time and about whom you have a very fascinating reading by Blake Lyerly. And Egeria came up to the area of the Sea of Galilee, of course, and visited some of the sites that were already being shown to people locally as pilgrimage spots. And from this view, so something similar to what Egeria herself could have seen, you see Capernaum The excavation area is right here for Capernaum, hidden behind trees. This is the Mount of the Beatitudes. And Egeria tells us, after she has visited Capernaum, that not far away from there are some stone steps where the Lord stood. And in the same place by the sea are 7 springs. And this is the field where the Lord fed the people with the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. Those 7 springs are at this site, Heptapegon, whose Arabic name transmutes into Tabga. You can see the root for it right about there. Heptapegon means 7 springs in Greek, and the site is just south of Capernaum, hard on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, right here, a very tiny, adorable site, where in the latter part of the 19th century, German archaeologists, or actually more properly biblical scholars, excavated a number of sectors. So here's the road, and here's the hills, and the Sea of Galilee is right here. Right exactly on the edge of the Sea of Galilee is a small chapel that is from the Byzantine period in general, and it sits on top of a bedrock carving that was originally a quarry. So this area here was originally in the Roman period just a place where blocks of stone, the same black basalt stone that almost all of the buildings in this area are made out of, was quarried out of. And then a little ways away from the shore itself, in the 4th century, so in the same time as the Domus Ecclesiae was created at Capernaum, a small chapel was built. And then in the 5th century, that chapel was expanded into a larger basilical church, which you see here, which is called the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves and the Fishes. Egeria came to this site, to Heptapegon, and she said that, in fact, the stone on which the Lord stood has been made into an altar. People who go there take away small pieces of the stone to bring them prosperity, and they are very effective. The church that you're looking at here was rebuilt within the last 20 years, exactly on the lines of the 5th century basilical church. And when it was constructed, before it was constructed, there were more excavations. And in the area of the apse of the church, right here, below the modern flooring, was found an old piece of bedrock that had been very clearly, methodically, and consistently chipped away regularly by lots of people, and is believed by the excavators to be the stone that Egeria saw. There were some older mosaics in the 4th century chapel that were then preserved in the larger church in the 5th century, and these mosaics evoke the same set of themes as were in the octagonal church at Capernaum. So the peacock, which was in the center of the main flooring of the octagonal church at Capernaum, there are peacocks here, but the main themes along the aisles are these very, very popular Nilotic themes. These subjects of water birds and water plants that were typical to the Nile were very common in wealthy Byzantine villas in this period. In fact, there's a fantastic villa at Sepphoris, which, if we had more time in this class, we could have seen, but we don't, with wonderful Nilotic scene. Of these various plants and animals, and here and also at Capernaum, it appears that the theme is pertinent and copied because these places are right along the edge of the Sea of Galilee, and in fact the animals are all animals that are specific to fauna around the area of the Sea of Galilee. The reason that we call them nilotic as opposed to just water scenes is because of the presence of this very specific tower, which is a depiction in mosaic of an actual measuring structure that was used to calculate the height of Nile floods every year. And these things are called nilometers. And real ones have been found in various places in Egypt, along the Nile, even from deep antiquity, I mean, well before the Roman period, in pharaonic times. And the letters, which are depicted here in Greek, go in order of the Greek alphabet and are stages of the flood. So they depict elements in the stages of the flood.
So how would they, like, Egypt, that was a little up top, would they just drop like an obelisk in?
No, these were built. These were carved along the sides of the Nile, in the rock along the sides of the Nile. And so they, in the same way that flood marks are sometimes or measuring lines are depicted on the edges of viaducts here, so that, you know, if you get a flood, you can see how. There's something there that is part of the bridge, or? Well, that's what the Nilometers are like. Well, they're not part of bridges because they weren't bridges across the Nile, but they're specially carved out of the bedrock right along the Nile. So they're there stuck in the part of the ground itself, really. And so there must have been actually in this period mosaicists who traveled, artists who traveled, and they must have had sort of plan books of choices and subjects that they were adept at depicting. And some of the wealthier of these communities, and just because they're small places and small communities doesn't mean that they didn't have money to spend on these structures, would have hired some of these people. And obviously, the Christian communities at Capernaum and Tabgha had a little more money on their hands than the Jewish community at Beit Alpha, because the style of mosaics are a lot nicer, a lot more sophisticated, I should say, than the style of the mosaics at Beit Alpha. All right. So the earliest chapel, the 4th century chapel, which is the one that Egeria saw, and had mosaics and of Nilotic themes. But the 5th century church that was built, that is to say the church that was built after Egeria had been there, is what these particular mosaics come from, and they are even nicer and more elaborate. So they have the same themes, but the mosaics are even higher quality. When excavation was going on, cleaning these areas in the late 1960s and early 1970s, a small special mosaic, not of a Nilotic theme, also from the 5th century, so again post-Egeria, was discovered at the upper end of this particular ambulatory, so about here. And it's this. It depicts, as you can easily see, 2 fish and 4 loaves of bread standing upright in a basket. So I know that the text of Matthew specifies 5 loaves of bread, but clearly the mosaicist couldn't figure out how to fit 5 into the basket. But otherwise, it's true enough to the text that we have. And again, what's really interesting here is the timing. This is Egeria didn't see this. This wasn't there when she came. She comes in the latter part of the 4th century in 370. She comes because of the story. People who live here realize that more and more people are going to come to this spot because of the story, and if that's the case, then it's good to have a little on-time documentation of the event that is drawing people near. And so embedded in the otherwise very lyrical, not especially pertinent to any biblical story subject matter of the water animals and water plants and the peacock and so forth, is this sort of answer to, again, you have to imagine that this is essentially contemporary with the panel at Beta Alpha. And here are, again, these two communities with a very clear sense now of what the basis of their draw and their identity comes from, commemorating exactly those contrasting visions in the artistic representations inside their religious structures. At the same time, in the 4th and the 5th centuries, that all these synagogues and churches are being built in this area, pagan cult continues. It's really almost reflexive for us when we think, I don't know whether it's because there's a lot of fighting that goes on in this area today, or because we seem to have the pattern of thinking that people in antiquity were always in conflict with each other. But it is important to emphasize that for hundreds of years, for several hundreds of years, all these systems coexisted, and there's no evidence that they bothered each other, and there's no evidence that it was antagonistic. And it's extremely live and let live vision that we have. So up at the Paneion at Caesarea Philippi, the old sanctuary that's now going on, 500 years of worship. There's the cave, little temple that Herod had built in front of the cave, the temple of Zeus to the right of the artificial cave that had been built by Herod Philip. This is what it looked like in the Roman period. And then in the latter part of the 3rd century, just next to where the Temple of Zeus was, the Temple of Zeus had been right here, another open court was constructed. A building that probably housed dedications was built hard up against the cliff itself. And then a third building was built down here. So this structure is right here, this construction, and this road connects this courtyard. This road is this road here, connects this courtyard and goes down to yet a third building in the complex. So in the latter part of the 4th century, when Egeria is traveling to the Domus Ecclesiae at Capernaum and the little 4th century chapel at Tabgha, and just up the road is the synagogue at Chorazin, and just up the road from here is the synagogue at Baram. This is what this sanctuary looked like. It had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cult buildings, a sort of treasury house. It was, very large and impressive architecturally. We would love to know in all of these places what people actually did. That would be very interesting to know, but we basically do not. What you need is either somebody who describes the liturgy, the actual way in which ritual is carried out, or you need clear, datable archaeological remains to help you understand something about what people did there. We have no descriptions of liturgical practices of this early Christian period from these small church sites. And we don't have any archaeological remains from them either. From this site, however, we have a lot of archaeological remains from the period when it was at its architectural largest extent. And those remains are unbelievably boring. They consist of almost 3,000 very, very coarse, casual little bowls that look like the sort of thing you made when you were in 4th grade and you got some clay from your teacher and she said, make something, and you made a little ashtray or something or whatever. I don't know. When I was in the 1960s, we made ashtrays. I guess people don't do that anymore. So politically incorrect. I don't know what it is 4th graders do now with their clay. But anyway, tiny little bowl, which these were all used as lamps, and they were single-use lamps. And you can tell because you can see on all of them just one little burning place for where there was a wick, and that's it. And then there were about 200. This is what counts for a very fancy, expensive dedication at the Paneion in the Byzantine period. This is a mold-made lamp that was made locally. Again, probably bought cheap right there at the site as a sort of single-use dedication in the way that pilgrims in certainly Greek Orthodox churches will buy a little candle at the front and burn it and then put it in a holder at the front of the church. And these several thousand of these lamp dedications with no other, with not much other in the way of dedications at the site of this period suggests that a lot of people came, but they didn't hang around very long. Their dedications were quite casual and quite fast and quite cheap. So can you give me a specific?
I can't profile it at all, but I don't know.
Well, there are not sort of extended diatribes against pagans. They're not even really mentioned all that much.
And why are people today using the same text to do ridiculous stuff?
Well, that is a question a little beyond this class, but in this period, at this site, for example, at Caesarea Philippi, there's a church and a bishop. Well, they have their gods. And they, for somebody living at Caesarea Philippi, they might have felt that they had the power of the state and the period that they were living in behind them. I mean, they're living in a Roman city, established by somebody who was a client king of the Roman world. By this time, that city is 600 years old. Those temples are much older than any of those synagogues or churches. Those gods have been around for a long time. They have their texts, too. They have the Iliad. They have Greek all the stories of the gods, the Greeks and the Roman gods. They don't. There isn't really anything about the Christian or the Jewish communities who don't build gigantic cities and aqueducts and theaters and amphitheaters and colonnaded streets to make somebody who lives in a city like that and who worships at a place like this feel threatened. And indeed, pagan or Roman, I don't really mean pagan, but anyway, the culture of the day, Roman Byzantine culture, Greco-Roman culture, was alive and well, very, very flourishing. And this is just a brief look at one site down the road from Caesarea Philippi and up the road from Bet-Shan Scythopolis, right here, not too far from the southeastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, this whole geological slice is the northernmost continuation of the tremendous geological formation of Africa called the Rift Valley. It's really one continuous line. And it is an area of geologic instability. There are two plates that come together, two tectonic plates that come together. So it's earthquake prone. And it also means that periodically along it, there are elements from below the surface of the earth that spurt up. And this is one of those spots where there are natural boiling water, hot springs that pop up here at this site, which is called Hamat Gader, which means the baths of Gader or Gadara. Gadara is actually a Roman city, a big Roman city, just like Bet-Shan Scythopolis, huge colonnaded streets, temples, theaters, amphitheaters, the works, just down the road from here. And this was the sort of luxury spa bathing site right near the Roman site of Gadara. So that's what it's called. And it is a tourist and recreation spot today, as you can see from here with this natural, the steam rising up from the waters here. In the Roman period, the natural hot springs were channeled into this huge complex that was very, very elaborated and was this sort of, like I say, luxury spa, to which, I don't know about early Christians, but certainly rabbis came here. And the site is mentioned by various of the rabbis who wrote in this period, and one of the articles that you have to read that by Azan about Rabban Gamliel, who talks about going to the baths and seeing the statues of the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. He sees a statue of Aphrodite, and why doesn't this bother him, even though it ostensibly conflicts with one of the commandments. And the argument that he makes is that she has entered his space, where as opposed to him entering hers. And for the entire explication of the argument, you can read the article. But this is a similar complex to that which Rabban Gamliel was talking about in Akko. You see the main entrance here with its arcuated lintel, just like the synagogue at Baram or the temple at the Paneon, the temple to Zeus, and then this main entry hall. There was a special bath back here, and back here, this was a dedicatory hall. Every single or almost all of the paving slabs in this hall had an inscription on it. So that's how it was paid for. People paid for a slab, sort of like Citi Field, Mets Stadium today. I read about you could buy a brick in the paving and get your name recorded on it. And all of the inscriptions start with a formula, specific formula that says, "In this holy place will be remembered," and then there's somebody's name and their city and their title. So this was for pagans who lived in this area, not just a luxury bathing spot, but a sort of reverential place. And the main bathing hall is this very large place with the people standing in here can give you some sense of the scale of the whole enterprise. This is the Hall of the Fountains. And this is what it looks like if you go there today, but this is what it would have looked like if you'd been there back then. And you can imagine this would be a very nice place to go visit with its large vaulted roof and its clear story lighting. And all of these niches held tubs, individual tubs, so that you could have your own niche tub with your friends. There would have been statues, probably originally on top of these, and then the water filling the main hall. So very, very fancy and elaborate. Down in Jerusalem, at this period, we have from the early part of the 4th century, in the year 326, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the city concentrated in this northwestern quadrant, the emperors come and the emperors go, and then in the 6th century, is as a Roman Emperor Justinian, who takes office in the year 527, so the early part of the 6th century A.D. And Justinian, by the time of Justinian, actually, there were already many more churches, small churches, in various parts of the city of Jerusalem. But Justinian expands the number of pilgrimage churches, very large, imperially supported churches in the city, by extending the Cardo and constructing an even larger structure than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the new Church of Mary, the Mother of God, or as it is called, the Nea, which is the Greek word for new, which is the first of the first word in the long set of titles. And the Nea is almost all gone, but in the excavations of the upper city of Jerusalem in the 1970s, one of the underpinning vaults was found, and you see a person standing down here. The walls of the modern city of Jerusalem run through right about here, and one of the reasons that they do is because topographically the city the city drops off at this point. And so in order to have a large enough platform for the Nea, these enormous supporting vaults had to be constructed to make it large enough. And the reason that we know that this is the Nea of Justinian is because embedded in the wall in one of the vaults was found an inscription. This is the work which our most pious emperor, Flavius Justinianus, carried out with munificence, under the care and devotion of the most holy Constantinus priest and hegemon, which means person in charge, in the 13th year of the indiction, which is a wacky little Byzantine dating system. We have the specific year of the Nea as 542 CE. 542 CE. The site, another part of one of the side apses was excavated not too long ago, and this is a extremely pathetic shot of it, complete with some trash that's fallen down into it, so the street level is up here. Most of the main apse and the far right of the apses are gone. So this is just on the very edge of the city, not too far from where the southern wall goes across. So it would be lovely to have the entire thing, but we don't. But here is a weird and interesting computer reconstruction that gives you some sense of the Nea relative to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Size-wise, it's almost twice as big. And so from this drawing of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with these little to scale people in it, you can easily imagine how much more impressive and magnificent was the Nea. And to get to the Nea, the Cardo was extended, as I said, and you see some of the reconstruction there, and here some of that, the Byzantine period Cardo, as it's been excavated and reconstructed in Jerusalem today. Shops on the back sides, the main part of the Cardo, the covered part of the street, and so it's really an extremely elaborate strip mall. That's what all these Cardos are, and all these towns are very, very fancy strip malls. Shortly after Justinian builds the Nea, this church, obviously this is a new rebuilding, but it's a new rebuilding over an old plan, the Church of St. George in the town of Madaba, which is just a little bit outside of downtown Amman, the capital of modern-day Jordan. And on the floor of this church, this, again, typical basilical church, almost the entire nave was comprised of a 72-foot-long mosaic, which is a map of this entire region. It is the second oldest map that exists of the region. The oldest is a road map that's called the Punninger table, which was made in the 4th century CE, although we only have it in medieval copies. In actual fact, this is the oldest one that we have, and the oldest map that we have. And the map is pretty faithful. It's got the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. It starts at Egypt, which is down about here on the map. It has cities and towns on both sides of the Jordan, what modern-day Jordan and modern-day Israel. It extends as far north as Sidon. Lots of places are labeled. So here, for example, is Jericho. Here is right near Jericho, and you can see palm trees decorating the area around Jericho as they do today. Right near the area of Jericho is the place of the baptism, baptisma, right there, and a little chapel indicating that. So it is a map that purports to contextualize the holy places of this region. The holy places don't exist in isolation. They exist within a realistic landscape of place. And central to the map, indeed, literally central, is this depiction, which is labeled Hierapolis, the holy city of Jerusalem. And you see a depiction of Jerusalem as it was in the latter part of the 6th century CE. Here are the walls. There are various gates. This is Hadrian's original gate with that semicircular piazza immediately behind it, and the 2 cardos that funnel off of it. The first cardo goes all the way to the Nea Church, which you see here. Here's the main door of the church and the roof of its basilical hall, the triangular space over the doors. But the central place in the map of Jerusalem, which is itself the central place in the map of this region, is this here, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Oh, I forgot I was going to show you this. There's the gate and the semicircular piazza and the 2 streets going across. just like depicted here in the map in this bird's eye view. And here, now turned right side up to make it easier to look at, is a very clear and faithful reconstruction of, or depiction of, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The white tile of the Cardo, the steps leading to the 3 doors that are in front of the atrium itself, and then the roof of the basilica, and then behind the basilica, a small open space, and then the yellow tiles which depict the dome of the Anastasis over the tomb itself. So the Madaba map, which you see in this awful drawing, there's no good image that I could find that shows the whole thing, is a kind of map that we actually can that we can recognize. It's the sort of map that, for example, you could see on a postcard that shows a geographically delineated zone, the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, with highlights, the things that are of interest there. So we have Beit Alpha, and we have Beit Shan. There's the Tel. There are the colonnaded streets. There's the theater. We have Megiddo, great biblical site of Megiddo. And here is Jerusalem. Here is Jericho. So here's Caesarea with its big port. Now, this is just somebody's goofy idea. This is nothing. This is somebody's goofy idea of making a map in the style of the Madaba map. The Madaba map's locales are all connected to Christianity. But the point, of course, is that we make maps for the same reason that we write history, which is to serve purposes that we have today. And they are mental constructs based in reality, but not objective, transparent filters of that reality. About 150 years after the Madaba map was made, and I should say actually that the map on the floor of the Church of St. George in Madaba is not the only map mosaic for Madaba. There was apparently an entire school of map mosaicists, and there are other churches in Madaba that had maps as mosaic floors, different sorts of maps, and other places besides Madaba that had them. So there was a very thriving set of mosaic schools and workshops in this region as a whole. And not very far from Madaba and Amman is this site, Umarasas Castra Mefa, which was originally a Roman army town. It was constructed as an outpost for a subgroup of a legion. And it continued to grow and expand, and the population became mostly Christian. And in this town, there were 16 churches. Most of the town hasn't been excavated, and this is a view of the town. And this is what it looks like when you've got a lot of stone buildings that have fallen in on themselves and haven't been excavated. So underneath this field of stone are houses and churches and all sorts of buildings. I mean, a whole town, just in rubble, but little bits of it have been excavated. And in 1982, one of the churches was excavated. The Church of St. Stephen. And again, you see a large basilical hall, an apse with a platform or bema or altar in the apse, side aisles, and a very, very large and magnificent mosaic floor here in the front of the main part of the nave. This is another kind of map mosaic, this floor. It shows in the black border around the central panel, which is vines and grapes and birds and so forth, cities of Egypt. 7 cities of Egypt, all located in the Delta. One is Alexandria. It's actually right here. They're all labeled. Alexandria's name is right there. I mean, there are some people with there are little boats and water plants traveling around. And then on the long side panels, there are cities of Palestine, 8 of them, and cities of Jordan, Transjordan, 7 of them. At the top of the Transjordan lineup is Kasron Mafa'ah, this city, this exact place. And beginning at the bottom of the left-hand panel, we have Gaza. And then above Gaza is Ashkelon. And all of the depictions of the cities are quite similar. They have a sort of compressed combination bird's eye and head-on view showing the main gate into the city, the walls of the city, structures inside the city. Here's the back walls. And front and center, a church. Here at Ashkelon, the main church has a rotunda. It has a dome over the main part of it, and that's what's depicted there. So above Ashkelon, there is Eleftheropolis, which is Beit Guvrin, and Diospolis, which is where the airport is now, Lydda. And again, you see here's a basilical church. Here are 2 basilical churches in Eleftheropolis, 1, 2. Big vaults, which this is probably the colonnaded street with vaulted arches over the colonnades, and here as well, colonnaded street with arcades. Caesarea, there was an octagonal church on the top of the platform where Herod's old temple had been, and here you see that octagonal church, and the city gate, no harbor. Sebaste, again, great big church on the top, colonnaded streets below. And at the very top, above Sebaste, there's Neapolis, modern-day Nablus. Again, columns, big church. And Hierapolis, holy city, Jerusalem. Towers, gate, back wall, very compressed, but obviously in the center is a rotunda on these bowing columns. And this must be the Anastasis of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of St. Stephen has an inscription in the floor in Greek with information that allows us to date the church to a specific year. And that year is 785. That's the latter part of the 8th century, CE. Now here's what's pretty interesting about this. In the latter part of the 8th century BCE, when the mosaicists made this vision of Jerusalem, this is what it actually looked like. Here's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And here, today in a bronze aluminum alloy, but then actually in gold, is the dome of the third holiest shrine in Islam, the Dome of the Rock. Because in between the time of Constantine and Justinian and the depiction of Jerusalem in the map of Madaba, and the time of the construction of the Church of St. Stephen at Umm Rasas, Muhammad was born, founded a new religion, organized, and took over the area of Arabia. And in the middle of the 7th century CE, immediately upon his death, that area was expanded to include most of the eastern sectors of the Byzantine Empire, excepting only Anatolia, Byzantium, Constantinople itself, Greece, and parts of the Balkans. And in the year 638, Jerusalem was captured by the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab, who was one of the 4 successors of Muhammad. And the city passed under and into the dynasty of the Umayyads. The top of the Temple Mount was in ruins because the Temple of Jupiter had been torn down during the Byzantine period and nothing had been built in its place, because the center of gravity in the city had moved to the dome that protected the burial place of Jesus. Why was it torn down? Probably because, we don't actually know if it was torn down. What we know is a story that I'm about to tell you about the person who actually builds the Dome of the Rock. So we know that it was the top of the mountain was in ruins. The top of the Temple Mount was in ruins. We don't know. It was a number of hundreds of years that it could have just gone without upkeep and become a ruin, as buildings will do when they aren't used and they're just left to languish. So, Caliph Ibn al-Khattab was the person who captured Jerusalem, and his successor, his name just went out of my head, but I have it written down here someplace. Oh yeah, Caliph Abd al-Malik. His successor, when he came into Jerusalem in the year 687, the tradition records, the early Islamic historians record, that he came to the top of the Temple Mount because for Muslims, this was a holy place. This was the rock on which Abraham had sacrificed Isaac. This was the site to which Jesus had come. This was the site upon which Solomon had built his temple. And Muhammad, before his death, had declared this place to be, after Mecca and Medina, the next holiest place for all Muslims because of these historical traditions and these earlier prophets who had preceded himself. And so Caliph Abd al-Malik came to this Temple Mount and found the area in complete disrepair and began himself picking up stones and moving away dirt, and all the people who were with him helped. And then he inaugurated construction of this octagonal shrine topped with a dome immediately over the rock that was identified as the centerpiece of the site. And that is the structure which still stands there today, Qubat as-Sakra, the Dome of the Rock, which was dedicated in the year 691, the latter part of the 7th century. And if you go to the Dome of Rock today and you go inside, indeed, you can see the rock itself, which Muslim tradition holds was, in addition to its other associations with Judaism and Christianity, the spot to which Muhammad was borne aloft on his horse on the night of his death, coming from Mecca, and from which then, with the help of one of the angels of the Lord, he ascended to heaven. And around that very rock was the dome constructed to be almost identical, but just very slightly larger in size than the dome over the birthplace or the burial place of Jesus, the dome of the Anastasis of the Holy Sepulchre. Almost immediately, enormous constructions under the Umayyads were built around the Temple Mount. So here you're looking at the south side of the Temple Mount. These are the steps, the Herodian steps. You may recall this is one of the edge of one of the doorways. And all of these constructions inside here, all these snow-covered constructions, are Umayyad. They're from this first century of early Islamic rule. So from the 7th century AD. And this is Crusader, in case you're wondering. Or this piece, anyway, is Crusader. In the latter part of the 7th century and the early part of the 8th century, when Jerusalem and all of this region was part of the Umayyad Caliphate, churches such as those at Asas, the Church of St. Stephen, and synagogues continue to be built, attesting to the acceptance and support of the Umayyad rulers and the continued economic vitality of the communities who lived here. You are looking east from Jerusalem to the region of Madaba and Asas on the horizon. And just before them, at the site of, in the area of Jericho, where the old Hasmonean and Herodian palaces were, a little synagogue was built in the era of the time of the Church of St. Stephen and the Umayyads. And it's a very small and simple building, and it has a central mosaic panel. And this is it, the synagogue at Jericho from the time of the early Islamic period, the 8th century, the latter part of the 7th century and the 8th century. And the panel has a menorah, a palm branch, a lulav, a shofar, and an inscription in Hebrew that reads, Shalom al Yisrael, peace over Israel. Peace over Israel. What, in the 8th century CE, is Israel? When we started this class, Israel was a tribe named by the Egyptians, a people, not tied to a place, not tied to an idea, just a physical group of souls, men and women, without a settled domain. In the early part of the first millennium, Israel was a kingdom. It was a polity. Part of the kingdom of nations. There was Israel and Aram and Ammon and Edom and Judah and Philistia and Phoenicia. It was specific to one place, and all who lived within that place were part of it, and all who lived outside of it were not. Israel transmuted to the surviving of the kingdoms, Judah, became a place and a people combined in the Persian period. Coins with the name Yehud, attesting to the recognition of this as a group distinct. Herod, when he becomes king, almost 1,000 years after this polity was first established, seeks to put these people and this place on an equal footing with the larger imperial systems that have dominated the Near East and the Mediterranean world for hundreds of years, turning it also into a presence. But as larger political entities overtake this region, Israel as an idea recedes into a symbolic universe, held onto by people who want to identify, no matter where they live, what language they speak, or what larger polity they belong to. And those people, grounded in belief, develop a deep appreciation for and honored stance towards their past. And it's a trajectory that the people of both the other large religions that are born in this country followed, not in every detail, but in many aspects. The modern Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai thinks in very hard and thoughtful ways about what it means to live somewhere where not only the past is such an important feature of the present, but that past is a changing palimpsest, looking different to every person who looks at it. And he has written a poem which you have in your course packs called The Ecology of Jerusalem. The air over Jerusalem is saturated with prayers and dreams like the air over industrial cities. It's hard to breathe. And from time to time, a new shipment of history arrives. And the houses and towers are its packing materials. Later, these are discarded and piled up in dumps. And sometimes candles arrive instead of people, and then it's quiet. And sometimes people come instead of candles. And then there's noise. See you Thursday.